We have talked about doing this for a long time, and it's been something that we've done on and off. We now have the capacity to do this on a more regular basis. My inbox is always full. In fact, I could show you right now, people having questions, and they're always, the variety where you actually want to sit down and talk to somebody, not just, shoot them off a 30-second response, which is kind of what email has to do. And I thought, let's try to find a way to make that available to people. And so we're setting this up. I want it to be more than just me. We have so many really bright people on staff that have a lot of skills and a lot of things to share. And we just want to make them accessible, particularly to our members. So if there are questions, if there are things that we need to delve more deeply into, we also want to make sure that this is a safe space in the sense that we can talk about stuff. And Norm, I see you're recording it, but we want to make sure that, we're not kind of inundated with people who are not serious about the topics and want to really discuss them deeply. So I did the podcast with Sam. Why can't I think of his last name? His book's right over there.
Quednau?
Yeah, Sam Quednau. What a sweet man. He's been covering the opioid crisis as a reporter for a number of years. And he found Strong Towns because he was searching for ways to address this problem. And I'll summarize what is years and years of work and hundreds of written words, thousands of written words with this. And I think it's a little bit pithy, but this is how he summarized it too. If we are going to keep people out of addiction, we need to get them into community. And if we're going to help people get out of addiction, we need to get them into community. And so the baseline here is that people need to live in places where they're connected to others in a community. We talk here at Strong Towns about our purpose and what we are seeking. And we're trying to help people live meaningful lives in a productive place. And as we break that down and talk about it, we're not selling utopia. We're not pretending that we can fix every problem, and we're not pretending that every problem is even fixable. But what we are saying is that human beings, all of us, can live a life of meaning, one where the things we do actually matter, and that we can see that work result in our place becoming better over time, a better version of itself. And I think there's a lot of overlap here between Sam's work and Sam's insight, and that insight about what it means to be successful as a strong town in terms of like the human connection. So I would just say, get started, right? Like form a local conversation, meet with people, start doing what you can with what you have, and take that next step. It was John Anderson who really clarified it for me many years ago when he said, we're not trying to build Paris. We're just trying to build a slightly less shitty version of the place you live in now. And I think we can be a little bit even more optimistic about that and say, we're trying to make our place, better than it is. If we all do that, it will be transformative. And even if a small fraction of us are doing it, it will still be meaningful. We get this question a lot because people who live in big cities often say, well, it seems like Strong Towns is for small towns. And then we get people in small towns who will say, well, it seems like all you guys talk about are big cities. I do think that the core insight is a really good one, because the way change happens in systems is very different when you're talking a large kind of top-down oriented system and a very bottom-up one. I think we can see in cities like, and this is not, I'm not going to paint a happy picture for you here, in cities like Detroit and Memphis, which are major US cities. I mean, these are in the top, 100 cities in terms of population and size and capacity in the US. What we see is that strong towns ideas come to the fore in two ways. Number one, in the absence of competent and effective government, which you do get an absence of that when you're broke. I mean, that the part of, you know, the good governance kind of aspect of strong towns is that a prerequisite for doing good is that we have to be financially solvent. When you become financially insolvent and you can't do the things that people expect, things start to break down. And what we see then is that people start to step into that void and do those things themselves, make the best of things, and in some ways do things that are truly beautiful. I mean, we've seen examples in Detroit and in Memphis of people taking matters into their own hands, working with their neighbors to fix up a corner, fix up a block, fix up a neighborhood, do things to slow cars down, do things to make the neighborhood more livable, more beautiful, clean up the park, do all kinds of things. Those things happen when governments fall apart. And I wish, I'm not pining for that for places, but I do think that that is one of the ways this manifests. I think the other one is, and we can be maybe a little bit more optimistic about this one. I think places, and I'll point to New York as being a leader in this, although Seattle, Los Angeles, and you know, not so much Chicago, but I have seen, you know, inklings of it there. Have embraced the idea of prototyping, so tactical urbanism, as a way to make change that they've otherwise found difficult to make. The famous one, of course, is Times Square in New York. Jeanette Sadik-Khan wrote about it in her book Street Fight, and it's really, really good. But you see this, and I think Mike Lydon's book, Tactical Urbanism, Mike Lydon and Tony Harris put that book together. A lot of their examples come from Miami. They come from some larger cities. And this is an example of these top-down systems kind of taking the boot off the neck, so to speak, and allowing that kind of block level messiness to happen as a way to learn and scale up. I'm fine with that. Like I think that as a way to start, it's a really good way for those systems to start, is to make room for that. And I think over time, what we hopefully see is that that good bottom-up stuff, that prototyping, starts to crowd out the other stuff, particularly as the money gets tighter and gets more difficult and gets more localized. Andrew, you have something to follow up on that?
I do. I'm glad you called on me. I was just going to say, the other thing to understand is that incrementalism is really key. And at Strong Towns, we talk about this a lot. And what we should understand is that even though we might wish for an entire system to change, sometimes like the whole system changing is probably not possible, but sometimes very tiny changes that are possible have a disproportionate impact on outcomes. And the best widespread example of that right now is parking reform, where we see many cities that are dropping parking minimums. On the one hand, that change is so small that it can generally be done with a simple council vote. But on the other hand, the impact that has on our built environment and all the ramifications around that is tremendous. So I think it's important to think when you're faced with an overwhelming system in terms of points of leverage and what are the small changes that are possible that could have big secondary effects. And then I'd say the final piece of that is just patience. Like these things take time. And we have to be in it for the long haul and recognize that even though it may not be what we would wish for if we had a magic wand, that, you know, if a city does make good decisions, little small decisions, bit by bit over the decades, that makes all the difference. That's how we got into this. And we should expect that it's going to be how we're going to get out of it as well.
Here's the problem with having Andrew here is that him and I could talk back and forth on every one of these things for the whole hour. You brought something up, and I wanna key on it. Ta-Nehisi Coates, and not to argue with you, not to push back on you, but I do think there's some nuance. Ta-Nehisi Coates said something along the lines of the system change you want, the like phase change you want, is not going to happen automatically. Like if you're trying to like overthrow the whole system, you need to work incrementally. You need to work, and as you described, Andrew, you can get these changes. But every now and then the system does turn itself over. It does, in a sense, reach what Malcolm Gladwell called like the tipping point, and you throw out one and you replace it with another. And in order for us to be that thing that replaces the system, you have to actually be viable at the incremental scale. You actually have to have enough prototypes and workings to say, oh yeah, that makes way more sense. Let's stop doing this. So I don't think we should say complete systems change or bust, but I think we should be prepared. We should be doing really good work and then prepared for that when I think it will inevitably happen. That's an interesting question. Like where would I look for evidence? I used to get in these, well, we're all friends here. I can say this, right? I used to get in these pissing matches with the people at the market urbanist report or whatever. And they were like, Chuck, if you're right, show us the cities that have declared bankruptcy. Where are they? They don't exist. And, you know, there was something like 80 or 90 governments that went through some type of financial restructuring in the last year. Most of those were like sewer districts and water districts and places that, you know, had of that ilk. We every now and then have a big city or a county or a big government that goes through that. But I kept reiterating to them, and I think I will reiterate here as a way to think about this. I don't think that bankruptcy in like a business sense is what we're likely to see from governments that are failing. I think what we'll see, or what we are seeing, are a number of trends moving in the wrong direction. The first trend, well, let's walk through the life cycle, right? We go build the brand new suburb. Everything is brand new. We financed it through mortgages, commercial real estate loans. The local government has very little debt or kind of transactional debt. Tax rates are low and growth is great. And yay, it's a, you know, financial dream. Then the costs start to come to bear. And what we see happen in that, particularly that second life cycle, is that the tax rates start to climb. So in other words, we were a low tax place and now we're looking around going, well, their taxes are higher. We can bump ours up. The narrative about low taxes starts to go away and taxes start to climb up. Simultaneous with that, and sometimes preceding that, because we are sensitive to tax rates in these growing places like this, is that the debt starts to climb up. And I wrote an article, and I included this in my first book too, about the difference between cash flow debt and insolvency. In those early stages, we start to talk about debt as cash flow debt. We have this big maintenance problem coming up. We're going to finance that over a long period of time. But no, we're not insolvent. This is just cash flow. And we mistake the two. So you see that the debt starts to climb up. The kind of next step is that what you see is that the liabilities that are left untended to also starts to climb up. So we have a park that we're now not maintaining. Boy, we just don't have the money to maintain it. We have streets that, you know, we should go out and fix this one this year, but we can put it off for a year or two. And all of a sudden that backlog starts to creep up and you're like, well, we got millions of dollars in the backlog now. And now we got tens of millions of dollars in the backlog. And those three things kind of just start to weigh on things because they all like grow and grow and grow over time. Then you reach the phase, and I think we could point to the most recent example is Jackson, Mississippi, of a place where you're no longer able to keep the ball in the air, so to speak. You know, all three of those things limit the rising tax rates, the rising debt, and the accumulation of liabilities in a backlog of things that are unfunded and falling apart, limits your ability to respond to stress. And so what ultimately happens is that the pipe breaks and you can't fix it, or you're delayed in fixing it, or you can't mobilize what you need to go out and take care of it. And you have, you know, days, weeks, months with water that's undrinkable. You see the same thing in sewer systems where we can't fix that pump. And so all of a sudden the sewage starts to back up and things start to go bad. This is like the critical end phase of this. And I think the thing about thinking of it as like evidence we can point to is a real touchy one, because we can look at Jackson, Mississippi. And if we allow ourselves to become part of the zeitgeist, part of the political conversation, you can hear all kinds of, I did a whole podcast on this. You can hear all the excuses for what has gone on in Jackson, and none of them have to do with our development pattern and its insolvency. You will hear, everything from this is all white flight and racism to this is all those people who don't know how to take care of things. And these are gross, yucky narratives that really do not get at the core of the development pattern. And so when you're looking for evidence, you're not going to find something where you're going to be able to draw those people out of the zeitgeist and say, see this, see. But I think that when we can talk to people and explain what's going on in these terms, it becomes quite obvious, and you actually kind of start to see it everywhere in North America in a way that you don't see in other parts of the world. I am going to say yes. And I think the word strategic plan is a really good one, as opposed to a comprehensive plan or a master plan. John Reuter, one of our other board members, had a really great insight a few years ago, and it stuck with me. He said the length and the detail of the plan should directly correspond to the number of people that are required to implement it. So if you are trying to do something really complicated, and his example was, we're going to assemble an IKEA furniture set. If you're going to assemble a IKEA furniture set, you have a master plan for doing that. And it lays out, here's like the boards you have, here's the screws you have, here's where this one goes. It's very, very, very detailed. But only one person has to implement that plan, right? It's like, I'm the only one who has to deal with it. It's just me. If you are trying to do something that involves thousands of people or tens of thousands of people or hundreds of thousands of people, and you're putting together a plan, that plan needs to be very simple, very strategic. It needs to lay out values and vision, and a direction, but leave a lot of, in a sense, flexibility for how things are implemented. I think that all cities should have a strategic plan of that ilk. And I remember in the early days of Strong Towns, when we were bringing on our current board, which has been with us since 2014, that board was telling us we need a strategic plan. And I'm like, we got a strategy. We know what we're doing. And they're like, no, we need a strategic plan. And they were right. I was wrong. Our strategic plan forced us to, in the very early days of Strong Towns, recognize where our movement was growing, where we were succeeding, where we were falling short. It forced us to recognize the trade-offs inherent in one strategy over another. You all might not know this, but the early days of Strong Towns, we had a big internal debate over should we go around and write zoning ordinances and comprehensive plans and other things for people that were in our framework, or should we do something else? And we said, we can make money doing that and we can stay around, but that's not going to advance our mission to the way that we want it to the degree that we need it to be successful. And so we opted for this communication idea strategy. And then that forced us to say, all right, how do we fundraise around that so we can continue to perpetuate that and do that well? And that came up with our membership program. So having a good strategy, a good strategic plan, I think is really, really helpful. Comprehensive plans, master plans often devolve into perpetual work plans for engineers, grant funders, and others. And I find them less helpful today. If you're in the comprehensive plan, strategic plan business, I think you should migrate to the neighborhood planning business, where that type of work I think is a lot more helpful and applicable. Let me put it this way. I think our default right now should be that there's no annexations that make sense today. There are very few places and very few cities where growing horizontally is what is called for. I realize that there are defensive annexations where you acquire property in order to not have it develop in strange ways. I understand that. But I have yet, I mean, much like where should we build the next parking lot? It's one of those questions of where should we make the next insolvent investment? I struggle to find the place that makes sense. Could there be places where it did make sense to build a new parking lot? Perhaps. Could there be places where it does make sense to annex new property? Perhaps. But if you're in North America, every city here in North America, for the most part, I mean, that is in a position to annex property, has already expanded out in a way where they have more liabilities in the ground than they have tax base to sustain that. And so annexation is just, in a sense, a continuation of that insolvent development pattern. In the article I wrote for Shreveport, I try to lay that out, how I would ask the question financially, how I would approach it. And the first one here gets into priorities for spare capacity. Maybe I'll just end with this. If you have a water tower, a pump truck in your fire department, a lift station in your sewer plant, all of those things have a certain amount of capacity. And engineers will often say, if we do infill, all those things are going to be and have to be upgraded. And that's true. A lot of them have to be upgraded when we expand out on the edge as well. So expanding out on the edge and annexing property and bringing them in takes the spare capacity we have in those systems and allocates them to the most unproductive parts of the system. Even if the annexation on the edge made financial sense in and of itself, if it's robbing capacity that could go to other places that have a greater payoff for the community, I think from a pure financial sense, you have to step back and ask the question, is this a smart thing to do? And almost every time the answer is going to be no. I don't want to be like this is a blanket, like never do it, but I have never seen one that cash flowed, and I've never seen one that made sense financially. There might be the unicorn out there, but it would indeed be the unicorn. I feel like we have this long American tradition, whether it is, I remember watching the Disney movies when I was a kid, but the Boston Tea Party and what have you. And, we have this, you don't have this up in Canada, Norm. You're a very conformist society, but we're a society of nonconformists. And we tend to take matters into our own hands and do things like throw tea into the harbor when we don't like the way things are going. I think that this is a very healthy response. And I take a lot of inspiration from these groups, and I would like to see more of them. Obviously, there are safety issues. Obviously, it is better when we work in conjunction with local officials. And I guess I would go back to what Andrew said earlier about being strategic. I think if we're doing things just to be anarchists and shake things up, I don't see that as scaling to something. If we're doing something incremental that is not sanctioned or not allowed, but it's part of a greater strategy to raise awareness, to point out something, to kind of shift public opinion, or to lead to something else, I think that those things are really valuable. Like, they're priceless. They really are astounding. There have been a number of places where people have gone out and said, there needs to be a bus shelter here. There needs to be a bench here because people are waiting for the bus. And they go out and put it in, and then they basically dare the public officials to take it out. I think that is work that needs to happen. I here in my hometown, we had a very dangerous street crossing. And I'm not one who thinks that having orange flags that you can wave when you walk across the street is a good solution. But in the absence of anybody taking this seriously, we went out, myself and a little group here went out and used PVC pipe to tape or zip tie a little holder on the 4 stop signs we put the orange flags in each of them, and we put a little sign there that says, feel free to use these when you cross the street to raise your profile. And people use them all the time. They use them significantly. I got hauled into the county, I got hauled into the city council meeting. I was actually invited to just talk to the staff, and then it wound up, it was a fully scheduled council meeting, and they berated me for this. And then I got hauled into the county offices and because it was a city county roads. The county engineer wanted me to take it out. And he said, you are encouraging people to cross here, and it's dangerous to cross here. And I said, there's a school on the side. This is a neighborhood. People are crossing here. He said, you're encouraging this to happen. Take it out. And I refused. And I told him, if you think they're dangerous, you take them out. The reality is they never took them out because they didn't want to be liable for them taking them out and then having, well, there was something there and now there's not. I feel like that is a role we can fill, and a role we should encourage people to fill. And I just ask that you do it strategically, and that you have a long-term vision in mind. It not just be chaos for chaos's sake. Does that make sense? You can get behind that, can't you, Norm?
I can. We are very polite and very sensible in that regard. But it's a great, I mean, it's an important thing because we encourage people to take action locally. And sometimes that action almost feels like it has to be transgressive in order to move anything forward. On the other hand, like
Yes.
It requires that resolve to show up at council meetings or go out for coffee with a city councilor, like work within established systems as much as possible. Well, I've said, be as friendly to a councilor while also preparing to endorse their opponent. Like it's that wisdom to the way that the strategy of political action has to happen that I think sometimes we need to work on. But another key part of it
Couldn't
is
agree
local
more.
conversation.
Hey, Norm.
Yeah.
I couldn't agree more. And I feel like the default here has to be kindness and humility in the face of this, but also insistence, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I really appreciate the question. Is this a Tammy that's on the, I see we have a Tammy here. I wonder if it's the same. Thank you for this question. I feel like all engagement that we do has to be as humble as possible, and start with that kind of 4-step approach that we have put together. The idea of humbly observing where people struggle. It's funny because I've seen this show up in a lot of places now, and I think some people have started to use it as a slogan or an ideal, and maybe don't sincerely mean it, or think we sincerely mean it, but we like sincerely mean this. I gave the example in the article I wrote a while back about my city comprehensive planning process, and we don't have a lot of racial diversity here. But we do have people who are clearly marginalized and not part of the process. And there was a sensitivity within the conversation, the official conversation that involved all the important people in town that, well, we need to go out and make sure that we're listening to. In this case, it was the youth and, youth who would be, I'm going to say this kindly, this is my city, the youth that would stay, not the youth that are going to leave right after high school and go off to college, but the ones who are going to stay. How do we engage with them? And we went out to this place called The Shop, which is kind of like a gathering place for youth. And we set up a meeting with them, and we sat in the room, and the people running the meeting, the official comp plan assemblers, asked all the wrong questions. What's your vision for the city? What is your hope for the future? What do you think our top challenges are? These were people who day to day were trying to, a lot of them were just trying to like get to their job. A couple of them are still in high school. Like, how do we finish things up? How do we stay afloat? Like they were not thinking long-term about the city, nor should they, right? That wasn't their job. That wasn't their role in this society. They're too busy doing other stuff. So the questions finally got around to, I think, things that mattered. How'd you get here today? Where do you work? Where do you live? How do you get from one to the other? What is your life actually like? And how do you experience this city? And the recommendation that came out of this was we need to spend some time actually out with people, not asking them in a sterilized group, like, what do they think and what their priorities are? Because the reality is that conversation was absurd. At one point they asked, do you think we have enough parking in the city? And, everybody looked around and they're like, no, we don't have enough parking. We need more parking. And then I asked the question, how many of you have cars? And like one of the 15 of them had a car. Like, okay, how are you getting around? Well, we're walking or we're biking. So now the questions are framed in their lives. And I think that is the key to engaging with any group. When we go in and our question is, do we have enough parking? Because that's the thing we're obsessed about. Or what are the top 3 challenges you think we're facing? Because that's the way we frame questions in our world. We're not going in with the humility that we need to truly understand where someone is, where they're struggling. And in the 4-step process of Strong Towns, if you don't truly understand where someone is struggling, to use the community, to use the neighborhood, to exist in this place, you can't ask the next step, right? Humbly observe where people are struggling. Ask ourselves, what's the next smallest thing we can do to address that? Do that thing and then repeat the process. We have to be able to get to that second step and try stuff to make things better. We can't do that if we're not humble in our approach. I also think if the idea is we are going to, in a discrete period of time, engage a group. There's Black people in this neighborhood, and we want to engage Black people because fill in the blank reason. I am just like really turned off by that. I'm not suggesting that's what you're suggesting, but I see a lot of places that do that. And I'm really turned off by that conversation because it's almost like a checkbox that needs to be checked off. If we're going to engage with fill in the blank, any community, we have to do it on an ongoing, permanent basis as a part of a humbly act of service and an act of understanding and then iteration. I think this is the only way that those engagements will be genuine and actually lead to something positive. Strong Towns, I mean, I kind of alluded to this earlier. In the early days, I had done engineering consulting and plan consulting for many years. And the idea at the beginning of Strong Towns was we need to fix the engineers. We need to just get them this information and talk to them and train them and show them something different, and then everything will change. And of course, that was an absurd insight. I mean, that just, that was really dumb. That did not work. The next iteration was, well, we need to go and share this with public officials because they're the ones making the decision. And you hear this every now and then with advocates where they say, if we can just get the right person elected and they'll toe the line and vote their conscience and not be swayed. And like, that doesn't work either because we live in the real world. And, politicians generally do reflect the will of the public or they get voted out of office. It's that simple. And so fixing the public officials is a really kind of bad approach. The way that we have been successful and the way we've seen the most change happen around the issues that we care about is to share the ideas, to get these ideas in front of people, to make them as accessible as they can. And I was inspired last week because we were doing the kickoff event in Lake County, Florida. And 20 minutes into the opening event, a developer who was in attendance was sitting near Edward Erfurt, one of my colleagues, our colleagues here, Norm. And he said, this is dangerous. These ideas are dangerous. And he got up and walked out. I'm inspired by that because the best ideas are dangerous, particularly if you're wedded to the status quo. And so what we have developed is a platform and approach to sharing ideas and making those ideas as transmissive and as powerful as possible. The local conversations is an extension of that. And so if you want change to happen in your community, getting together with people and talking about it is the healthiest first step. The second step, and we walk you through this process, is to start to bring more people in, share those ideas, demonstrate what things can look like if it's done differently, pick something to focus on and work on that. But the whole base of the local conversations is taking the dialogue that we're having here on a national, international basis, and then localizing that to you, your conversation, your community, and essentially bringing the power for change that we're seeing here out of it and into your place. I don't think skeptical is the right word. I was not sure about the local conversations program, and I have watched it evolve and watched some of these places have massive, massive impacts just in the getting together and sharing of ideas. And I'm convinced that this is a really powerful way to do things. Norm, you're intimately involved in this. What am I missing?
I think that's a really good summary. I think one of the realities is that it's always cyclical, or there's seasons where people become really engaged. And one of the most discouraging things for local conversations leaders is that they find that there's kind of flagging enthusiasm after a while, or that people show up to protest, a major project. And if there's sort of a core of negativity at the heart of the group, of like protest and kind of like being opposed to something, that doesn't sustain people over the long haul. And I think that's why like Strong Towns making sure that we are outlining like what is the alternative, what is the proper way. And I know even just in the hour, based on the questions that we've had, there's a lot of questions. How do we actually do this? Like, where are the details? But the general gist of like making sure we're moving this ahead towards a better future, I think really, really matters there. I lead a local conversations group in my city, and we've been active. We've been having more and more opportunities to meet with city councilors and others, and basically invoke the fact that a large swath of the population, if they were to think about these things, would be on our side. And so then you kind of go in with a certain moral confidence that you are advocating for people that need help. One of the things I think every local conversations group should call themselves is a support group for altruists. Because it's just like we're the people that care about other people and want them to be better and have a better, more flourishing life.
Well, I think for us, Norm, I think starting with the conversation is the right grounding, right? Because a big part of our approach is I'm an engineer. I feel weird every time I talk about love and kindness, but it really, we start with this idea that it's about a connection between people and a shared vision. And you can't be, the antagonist who wants to fight with everybody to get things done. We're going to start with this conversation, and then it's going to build from there. So yeah, it's that grounding, I think, that makes it so powerful.
Chuck, we're going to go into the last little bit here. I just want you to sum up for us, maybe some of the things that you're hearing. You reviewed a lot of the questions. If there were any sort of words of encouragement that you might offer, or maybe share a little bit about what's coming up next. I'll share just briefly that we have Chuck tentatively scheduled for March the 1st, but we're waiting on a couple of travel things to get ironed out. And so it's possible to be later into March. But in the meantime, other Strongtown staff and colleagues are going to be hosting sessions as well. That's coming up. There's this whole, a massive amount of questions that are here. If you have an opportunity, I want to encourage you to check out the Strongtowns Action Lab, because that's a place where you can go to get details on all of the different questions. You can post your own questions in the community. I'm going to show you what that looks like just here. This is the Action Lab itself. And under the resources tab right here, that's where we're going to be posting the recording for this. So for those that came late, and I apologize because I tried to help this morning by sending out an email with the link just in short form, and it did not work. And so to all of you that have found your way here, I'm thankful for you. I apologize to you. And for those that came in later, this is where the recording will be posted within the day or so. Within that section, this is the resources page. You can see there's lots of different materials here. We're going to have a whole section devoted to office hours that has the schedule, what's coming up, places for you to be able to check out past episodes and all of that sort of stuff. Within that, you'll see that's what we've got set up there. just a quick overview, and then I'll try to set it up so that way you can follow by date which session it was and who the speaker was. Otherwise, Chuck, I'll leave the closing words to you. Yeah.
Well, cool. Because I was going to say you did a beautiful job there, except you're sharing a doc, and so the URL for the Action Lab is actionlab.strongtowns.org, right? Like I'll share my screen here real quick. This is the site. You use actionlab.strongtowns.org, and if you're on the main site, let me do that real quick. All this stuff is accessible by just going to the little spyglass up here. Or I think you can go to Learn too, right?
Yeah.
Action Lab. Yeah. We fixed it so the spyglass will get you here and you can do a search, and it's actually searchable with every article in our archive now, which is astounding. Like we've been trying to get that set up for years. And for those of you that are trying to find that article that you remember, if you remember like a couple key words, you can find it there now. Really, really great. Closing thoughts. The office hours thing is something that I'm excited about. Yeah, mine's scheduled for March 1st. That would be really nice, but you're going to want to see Edward Erfurt. He joined our team in October. The guy has worked for local government for 15 years, has a ton of experience in getting things done. He is one of the most gifted urban designers that I've ever been around, and his eye and his vision, he's going to have great insights to share. Daniel Harrigus, you all, I think, are familiar with to one degree or another. Again, another person who has the training and the background and the insights. We're also going to bring in Lauren and some of our other communications people. For those of you saying, like, how do we talk about this? How do we get this stuff done? These are people who are really, really gifted in that aspect of it. And they're going to give you a lot of insights that I think you'll find really helpful. We are... I have people ask me, like, how are things going at Strong Towns? And I'm like, I didn't know that the gas pedal went further down than what we had it. It does feel a little bit crazy here lately, just a frenetic pace. The big things that we have coming up, the Crash Analysis Studio, we are doing a soft launch of this week. I'm getting more confident as we get closer to the date. But a couple of weeks ago, I said, let's do it as a soft launch. Just the first one to make sure that we know what we're doing and we can work through this. As things have come together, I'm getting more and more excited about this. And once we do this first one, we're not going to do any more soft. It's going to be pedal to the metal. And I think that this has the possibility to be utterly transformative. We want to get thousands of cities signed up doing their own crash analysis studios and using their fatal and traumatic crashes as a way to fix their systems. This is going to be immensely empowering. We're also working on the Strongest Town contest, which is going to launch here very shortly. It's always a fun way to highlight the things that people are doing around the country. Every year we get a profound story or two or multiple out of the Strongest Town contest. And of course, we're going to be inviting the Strongest Town winner this year. Instead of me going there, we're going to bring them to the national gathering, which is like the third big thing that's going to launch here in the next few weeks, is the registration for that. We are doing it. We've had a lot of people asking for a long time. Can we get together and meet other Strong Towns members, other Strong Towns advocates? That will happen this year in Charlotte. We've got the agenda kind of roughly set up and are starting to kind of fill those spaces in, and it is excited. Andrew Burleson's on this call, and his criticism for me was that there was too much to do at our national gathering. So
it's true. I think I'll be curious to see how it turns out.
Yeah,
I'm sure it'll be really good though. I'm excited.
It will be great. But yeah, there'll be if anything, too much good stuff. So with that, our hour has come to an end. Thank you, Norm, for setting this up, and thank you everybody for participating and being part of it. I'm sorry I didn't get to every question, but Norm, maybe we can show people on the Action Lab where we've got the ongoing question submission thing too, because we're starting to see a lot more activity there and a lot more people helping each other figure things out.